Space has remained one of the greatest fascinations and sources of exploration in all of human history. The drive to go further than ever before has been the motivation to push to the stars for almost a century now. However, the rise of space technology did not only lead to peaceful exploration. It has led to frightening developments in military activity that threatens the sustainability of space utilization. Although the first rocket to reach space was launched in 1944, space technology first began during one of the most competitive races for technology of all time, the Cold War. The Soviet Union and the United States were locked in a war of ideology, production, and technological advancement.
We choose to go to the moon!
The pressure between the two superpowers to gain superiority over the other led to the space race. The space race resulted in great achievements such as landing on the moon, but space weapons were also frequently proposed. During the Cold War, spy satellites and missile defense systems using space were widespread. But space militarization certainly hasn't vanished since the Cold War. As new countries have developed space capabilities and weapons of their own, space is getting crowded and is seeing an escalation in the use of military technologies. With this recent uptick in militarization, the threat to the sustainability of space has never been more real. Among the technologies that pose a prominent threat is an ASAT, or anti-satellite, a weapon used to destroy satellites in orbit. Kinetic energy ASATs physically crash into satellites. In addition to being a direct threat to targets, a kinetic energy ASAT attack or test can generate large amounts of space debris in low Earth orbit that will normally continue circling the Earth for many years. On January 11, 2007, China launched an ASAT targeted at their own dummy satellite. The test created an estimate of more than 3,500 pieces of debris, of which 2,786 are still in orbit. A similar incident occurred in November of 2021, when Russia launched an anti-satellite missile, creating thousands of debris particles upon impact and causing the crew of the International Space Station to take emergency actions to ensure their safety. In addition to China and Russia, the other recent culprits of ASAT tests are the US and India.
We've seen over the decades countries test ground-based missiles capable of targeting satellites, and recently we've seen a resumption of testing and more countries demonstrating its capability.
In addition to kinetic energy ASATs, there are other types of ASATs that use non-physical attacks on satellites such as cyber attacks or frequency jamming. But the ability of ASATs to bring down satellites also has major impacts on the ground.
We rely on satellites for everything. GPS obviously is big, right? But there's a lot of things that are being relayed back and forth through satellites in terms of communications that we rely on every day. It's going to cause a huge effect because now we do rely on satellites in our everyday lives, so it's going to make a big impact.
Senior officials from the US and Canada stressed that the loss of satellites could take down GPS systems, power grids, first responders' communication, and impact military operations. But the potential harm doesn't stop here. When the amount of debris in the Earth's orbit reaches a critical point, a chain reaction effect may occur that increases the chance of even more collisions. This effect is called the Kessler syndrome. But what are the chances of such a catastrophic event occurring? The answer may be dangerously high. A report by the European Space Agency showed that the total number of all space objects has grown exponentially since 1960. According to a United Nations report, space debris has already reached a tipping point, where the critical density of objects in orbit could cause a chain reaction of collisions, and the risk of Kessler syndrome may be high.
And this is what is referred to Kessler syndrome. One satellite strikes another satellite, and then those satellites strike other satellites, creating more and more debris, sort of cascading debris creation, right? And at some point, low Earth orbit will become unusable in a sense that we won't be able to go through because of so many debris existing in that orbit. Outer space is just one global environment that impacts everybody on the ground.
Given the global impact on space, it is crucial that there are international regulations and agreements in place. Although there have been several space treaties adopted to deal with space activities since 1967, they are vaguely written and limited in scope, therefore unable to prevent the increased militarization of space.
Everybody agrees that the current international space law is not adequate.
Like with everything else, it takes a catastrophic event before people start taking things seriously, and that's unfortunate, but hopefully your generation can start to move the needle and start to tackle this problem before it becomes situation where we end up with Kessler syndrome.
Encouragingly, as one of the major space debris contributors, the United States announced a voluntary domestic ban on destructive anti-satellite tests in 2022.
The United States commits not to conduct destructive direct ascent anti-satellite missile testing.
Although this doesn't spell the end of space militarization, this crucial milestone of the United States setting an example for the rest of the world may be the first step toward an international effort to build effective legislation in solving the lack of international agreements on this issue. Our Earth and its immediate surroundings are a small pool of life and color amid the vast oceans of space. The United States' steps towards setting an international example to protect humanity's greatest asset have been the most important change made in our country in the past 20 years. With this change, we can finally push to the stars safely.